Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Tiff Unraveled. I'm Tiff. If this is your first time visiting me, then welcome. I'm happy you're here. This is a part two, though, to this brilliant reading of notes that I did last episode. And so if you want to go back and watch that so you know where we are today, I welcome you to do so. Although we didn't really get into a whole lot because I went off on such a tangent. Last time we talked about a man named Brian Wells, who, well, he was a pizza delivery man from Erie, Pennsylvania. He walked into a bank with a collar bomb around his neck, demanded $250,000, left with about $8,000, and then was apprehended in an Eyeglass World parking lot where live news was broadcasting apprehension of this suspect. And during that live news broadcast, Brian Wells was begging police officers to get this thing off of his neck, that he was not the perpetrator here, that they had to believe him. And in the time that it took for bomb squad to arrive 3 minutes prior to their arrival, the collar bomb around Brian Wells's neck it went off and he lost his life immediately and right there on television for everyone to see. It was incredibly sad. It was a kind of that helplessness, that feeling of helplessness for anyone who was watching. And so it was kind of in me telling that story that I found the handwritten notes that were left for Brian in his car, and I ended up going on this 30-minute reading of those notes. And so if that's something you like, please go back and watch it. Right? Quite accurate. I'm pretty sure I read it exactly as they intended for it to be read. But today we'll get into the actual timeline and there was so much more behind this, right? It wasn't just this. This was just the surface of what was actually going on. And so with that being said, my beautiful unraveled friends, let's unravel. Okay, so I'm going to rewind just a little bit just to kind of, just to rewind a little bit in case you didn't see part one. At 2:38 p.m. on this day, August 28th, 2003, a witness from the bank, the PNC bank that Brian was at, called 911. Okay, he reported a male leaving the bank with a, quote, bomb or something wrapped around his neck. Unquote. State troopers quickly located Brian Wells. About 15 minutes later, they proceeded to handcuff him by his vehicle and make him sit on the pavement. And Wells immediately told the state troopers that, quote, a few black men, unquote, had placed the bomb around his neck and had forced him to commit this crime, to commit this bank robbery. He repeatedly insisted, it's going to go off. I'm not lying. The officers are obviously, and rightfully, they're following an established protocol here, right? They secured the scene, they kept a safe distance, and they called and waited for the bomb squad to arrive. They obviously, police officers that are just on patrol and responding to these calls, right? They lack the specialized training to deal with explosive devices, right? These are people who need the training. You need to know what you're doing. You can't just walk up to a dude and defuse a bomb and call it a day. Specialized training, right? Hence bomb squad. Wells continued to plead for help, right? Asking for a key to the collar and warning them, quote, I don't have a lot of time, unquote. His voice growing increasingly frightful, in my opinion. Agitated, scared, frightful. Like he knew that this thing was going to go off. The bomb squad was called at 3:04 p.m., but there was distance involved. And then there were roadblocks and, all of these things going on. And it just meant that they would not arrive in time. At 3:18 p.m., the device began to emit a very distinct and increasingly rapid beeping noise. You can see Brian sitting on the pavement, hear this beeping. Brian's eyes widen. He became visibly panicked. He started shouting for help. And then 10 seconds later, the bomb detonated with this horrific force ripping a hole in Brian's chest and killing him instantly. The bomb squad arrived at 3:21 p.m., just 3 minutes too late to save Brian's life. The entire agonizing event was captured on live television. It's crazier than fiction. It really is. What happened here was not a failing of individual officers, right? But it was just a reflection of the sheer horror of this crime, which ultimately ended up prompting a reevaluation of emergency response procedures in this department. But they were doing what they knew they had to do. Right. This was not a failure of police at the scene at all. They had to keep their distance. They couldn't do anything. They had to follow protocol. They had to wait for the right people to arrive. And unfortunately, they just weren't able to arrive in time. In the immediate aftermath of Brian Wells's death, investigators found the homemade cane gun that we talked about in the last episode and the really chilling instructional notes that were in Brian Wells's car, right? A peculiar detail was a shirt that Brian wore into the bank, this white shirt that he wore covering this collar bomb that read, quote, "Guess," which was interpreted as a direct challenge from the criminals to the investigators. Now, police had their bank robber. Okay, there was no question about who committed that crime, but there were literally a million questions about like the notes they found in his car, like who's behind this? Was this guy telling the truth? Was he a willing participant? Was he an innocent victim? What is happening? What is happening? The first very significant break in this case, and the first major twist, came from an unexpected source approximately a month after Wells's death. Media investigating Wells's last delivery, his last pizza delivery, stumbled upon a man named Bill Rothstein, who lived remarkably close to the TV tower where Wells made his final delivery. He was called to this bizarre delivery at this remote TV tower location. It appears that Bill Rothstein lived very close to this tower. However, less than a month after all of this happened, Bill Rothstein himself called the police, not to talk about the bank robbery. No. He called the police to report a dead man in his freezer. Yeah, a dead man in his freezer. At the time, police did not immediately connect this gruesome discovery to the Wells case. There was no reason to at this time, right? Totally unrelated. It didn't even cross their mind. Police respond to Bill Rothstein's call, and the deceased man was identified as Jim Roden. Jim Roden was the live-in boyfriend of Rothstein's ex-girlfriend, Marjorie Deal Armstrong. Rothstein admitted at that time, after he made the call and police came and found Jim in his freezer, he admitted to helping Marjorie Deal Armstrong cover up Roden's murder, claiming that she killed him over money and paid Bill $2,000 to help hide the body and clean the crime scene at her house. What? He told police that he called 911 because he became alarmed by her desire to use an ice crusher to dismember Jim's body. Roden's murder was later believed to be a very desperate act to silence him from disclosing the details of the emerging bank robbery plot. Here we go. Now we'll connect these dots, right? Here's where we unravel. Rothstein himself was a fascinating figure. Okay. He was a handyman. He was a part-time shop teacher. He was associated with a group known as, quote, fractured individuals. This was a group of intelligent individuals who just were not well adjusted. He was also identified as the putative creator of the collar bomb itself. Rothstein actually died of lymphoma in 2004 before he could ever face charges in the Brian Wells case, but after testifying against Marjorie Deal Armstrong in the Jim Roden murder. He was able to do that before he left this world. Let's get into the lady at the center of this craziness, Marjorie Deal Armstrong. So Marjorie Deal Armstrong very quickly emerged as the alleged mastermind of the entire pizza bomber plot. She was described by one judge as, quote, a coldly calculated criminal, recidivist, and serial killer. I don't know what recidivist is. Recidivist. Hold tight. Okay. A recidivist is a convicted criminal who reoffends, especially repeatedly. Repeatedly. That was Marjorie and his words. Moving on. Marjorie's history was quite chilling, to say the least. She had suffered from multiple mental illnesses, including bipolar disorder. She was also a compulsive hoarder. Before her mental health deteriorated in her 20s, she was actually an exemplary student who had gone on to earn a master's degree. Diehl Armstrong's past was quite riddled with violence. She had killed two boyfriends, Robert Thomas and James Roden, and several other partners that she had died under suspicious circumstances. Guys, what? She was acquitted of murder in 1984 after shooting her boyfriend Robert Thomas 6 times, claiming self-defense. Marjorie, babe, are you okay? Who hurt you? Her motive for the bank robbery was profoundly dark. She wanted to obtain $250,000 to pay Kenneth Barnes. Guys, this stuff cannot be made up. This is what's so crazy. Okay, she wanted to rob a bank to acquire $250,000 to pay a man named Kenneth Barnes to kill her father, Harold Diehl, whom she believed was squandering her inheritance. She even supplied the kitchen timers that were used in the collar bomb's construction. Guys, the bank robbery plot was not like the primary goal, right? But a means to a much more sinister end, patricide. Have you guys ever heard of it? Patricide? Killing one's father? That was her end goal. That was Marjorie. Girl. This elevates the stakes, right? And demonstrates the extreme lengths that Marjorie Diehl Armstrong was willing to go to. And she had no problem entangling countless others in her schemes. Marjorie was actually ultimately convicted of murder in the Roden case, the murder of Jim Roden in 2007. And she was later found guilty on 3 charges in the Wells case: armed bank robbery, conspiracy, and using a destructive device in a crime of violence, receiving a mandatory life sentence in 2010 and 2011. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong actually died in prison in 2017. Remember that guy I just mentioned, Kenneth Barnes? Let's talk about Kenneth Barnes. Kenneth Barnes was a retired television repairman and a current crack cocaine dealer. He was described as Marjorie Diehl Armstrong's fishing buddy. A crucial connection to Brian Wells was established through prostitutes who frequented Barnes's house, one of whom Brian Wells knew. Barnes was eventually turned in by his brother-in-law for bragging about his involvement in the heist. He agreed to a reduced sentence of 22.5 years in exchange for his testimony against Marjorie, and Barnes pleaded guilty to conspiracy and some weapons violations, admitting that he actually served as one of the lookouts, or as the notes said, sentries during the bank robbery, and that he had instructed an accomplice on how to build a pipe bomb. Barnes's confession actually provided very critical details, though, including corroborating that Marjorie was indeed the mastermind behind this entire plot that was designed to obtain money to pay him to kill her father for the inheritance. Okay, let me say that again. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong was the mastermind behind the plot that was designed to rob the bank, to obtain the money, to pay Barnes to kill her father for the inheritance. Most significantly, Mr. Barnes shed light on Brian Wells's role, right? We're all wondering, like, did he know what was going on? Was he a willing participant? Was he an innocent victim? Was he called to this remote spot to deliver a pizza where he was attacked and this collar bomb was placed around his neck and he was told to follow all these instructions, and if he didn't, he would die? Was that the case? Kenneth Barnes actually said that Brian Wells knew about the plot, but he did try to back out when he realized that the bomb was real. Yeah, same. I would too. And then a gun was actually fired in his presence to force his compliance and allow the collar bomb to be placed around his neck. Kenneth Barnes also died in prison in 2019. And as though there weren't already enough characters in this cast, no. One more. Floyd Stockton, a convicted rapist who lived as a fugitive at William Rothstein. Remember Bill Rothstein, big super smart guy, was also found to have conspired in the crime. In interviews with law enforcement, Floyd Stockton claimed to be the one who physically placed the bomb around Brian Wells's neck. Now, Stockton was actually granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for his testimony against Marjorie Diehl Armstrong. However, he was never called to testify in court due to illness. He later also died of an acute respiratory failure. His death meant that a very key piece of the puzzle, right, a direct account from one of the individuals who allegedly placed the bomb, was never presented in court, which really did leave this void in the official narrative. Jeez. The interconnected lives of Diehl Armstrong, Barnes, Rothstein, and Stockton, all marked by, mental illness, drug using, drug dealing, prior criminal histories, right? It just is such a revelation of this deeply dysfunctional network of people. The description of Rothstein as part of the fractured intellectuals group points to a collective dynamic where all of these people were so intelligent that I swear, like, man, if any one of these people had just gone a different path, like, what could they have accomplished? What could they have done? There was such intellect here, but they were all profoundly maladjusted individuals, and it was only them who could conceive and execute this bizarre and convoluted plot. The complexity of the bomb itself and the scavenger hunt that we read through quite well in the last episode, might I add, combined with their shared traits, suggests a very twisted intellectual capacity at play. The motive ultimately rooted in Marjorie Diehl Armstrong's desire for an inheritance and her willingness to hire a hitman demonstrates the extreme lengths that this woman would go to and how she just entangled all these others in her increasingly violent schemes. The deaths of key conspirators before or during their full accountability means that, as I said, very crucial pieces of the puzzles died with them, contributing to the enduring mystery and the public's feeling that there was much more to this story, if you can believe it. That's what we feel. This went deeper than we could even imagine. So as far as key players, let's just go through them again. We have Brian Wells, pizza delivery man, victim of the collar bomb, alleged co-conspirator. Brian was described as childlike. He had no criminal record. He had worked for this pizzeria for 10 plus years, never been in any trouble. Brian died August 28, 2003, when that collar bomb detonated. We have Marjorie Diehl Armstrong, the alleged mastermind, planned this robbery to fund a hitman, coldly calculated criminal recidivist and serial killer, as described by that judge. Killed 2 boyfriends in her past. Jim Roden and Robert Thomas and other partners had died suspiciously. She died in prison on April 4th, 2017, while serving a life sentence for the Wells case and a previous murder conviction. We have Kenneth Barnes, the conspirator, the lookout, confessing to Deal Armstrong's plot. Retired TV repairman, crack cocaine dealer, Marjorie's fishing buddy, connected to Wells via prostitutes. Okay, he died in prison June 20th, 2019, serving 22 and a half years, reduced from 45, testifying against Marjorie Deal Armstrong. We have Bill Rothstein, creator of the collar bomb, hid Jim Roden's body for Marjorie Deal Armstrong in his freezer. Handyman, part-time shop teacher, part of the Fractured Intellectuals group, ex-boyfriend of Marjorie Deal Armstrong, incredibly intelligent man. Died of lymphoma July 2004 before ever being charged in the Wells case, but not before testifying against Marjorie Deal Armstrong for the death of Jim Roden. Then we have Floyd Stockton, the other conspirator, claiming to be the one who placed the bomb around Brian Wells' neck. He was a convicted rapist. He was a fugitive living with Bill Rothstein at the time. He also passed away of acute respiratory failure. He was granted immunity, but was never able to testify due to that illness. James Roden, Marjorie Deal Armstrong's boyfriend, murder victim. Body of Jim was found in Bill Rothstein's freezer, and he was killed to prevent him from disclosing the robbery plot. He was murdered by Marjorie in 2003. Then we had this young lady who was a sex worker that we had talked about prior, who was like the mutual friend of Brian Wells and Kenneth Barnes. She was also an alleged conspirator. She actually confessed in the Netflix documentary Evil Genius, which is unreal. You guys have to go watch that. Like, you have to watch that. If you're interested in this case, go now. Run, watch, blow your mind. She confessed in this documentary to setting Wells up for money and drugs. It's not known where she is right now, but no charges were ever filed against her despite her confession to being a co-conspirator. Guys, I mean, cast of characters, is this real life? Am I doing am I telling a true crime story, or am I talking about the plot of a movie? I'm telling you, it should be a movie. No, a series. Like I said last episode, this should be a series. This is what got me so crazy about true crime. This was the case. This was the catalyst for me. Like, going down these rabbit holes with this story ignited every true crime fire that lives in my soul today. I have this case to thank for that. So anyway, it's cool that you guys are here to listen to it. Anyway. And so there you have it. The Brian Wells case, even after convictions, remains shrouded in all of these like unsettling questions, most notably concerning Brian Wells' true role. I think that's the main question that I have, because all we have right now are convicted conspirators slash murderers slash felons slash robbers slash saying like, oh, no, he knew what he was getting himself into. Don't you worry, he was involved 100%, right? Take our word for it. Yeah, sure, guys. And so that is the biggest question, at least that I have, and I think that a lot of people have, is Brian Wells' true role in this whole thing, right? The persistent debate is not merely a factual discrepancy, but a very profound moral and legal ambiguity that continues to define this entire case. And going into that a little bit more, the prosecution's view, like as they presented it in the indictment, was that Wells was a co-conspirator with a, quote, limited role, unquote, in the planning phase of the bank robbery. They suggested that he may have been a participant, but that he didn't realize that the bomb was real until the last minute. Kenneth Barnes's confession supported this idea, indicating that Wells, again, as we said, tried to back out when he realized that the bomb was live, and then he was forced at gunpoint to proceed with the scheme. This implies a transition in his role, right? From a potentially willing participant in a fake robbery to an unwilling hostage in a very deadly scheme that ultimately took Brian Wells' life. Furthermore, Wells's calm demeanor in the bank, right? He was sucking on that dum-dum, guys. You can see it in the pictures that I posted. He was sucking on the lollipop. He had an apparent disregard for the note's dire threats. He was swinging the cane and the bag of money around like this was all just some like whoop-de-woo, like casual thing. And this, to me anyway, kind of does indicate that he believed that the bomb was fake. Like, I don't believe they told him that this was a real thing. I believe that perhaps Brian was a willing participant because of his casual demeanor in the bank. But once, this thing started beeping and like, he very quickly realized like, holy shit, I am chopped. I'm done. And this was real the whole time. So I believe he was tricked into believing that his role was something other than what it actually ended up being. I believe that he thought that he was safe from detonation, from any real harm. And then the notes themselves, right, they were designed to make him appear to be a hostage, but they were a part of the conspirators' plan to give him an alibi in case he were captured. They had no real intention of letting Brian survive this. I believe that he was the scapegoat in Marjorie Diehl Armstrong's whole plot. Brian Wells' family actually vehemently maintains his innocence. They assert that he was an innocent victim in all of this, that he was accosted at gunpoint and forced into this robbery. His brother, his name is John Wells, expressed absolute outrage at the co-conspirator label. And he said, Brian did not put that collar on himself. They argued that it was inconceivable that Brian would volunteer to be a walking, ticking time bomb, literally. The conflicting evidence and interpretations create a very profound ambiguity, right? Making Wells's true involvement, in this case, one of the most debated and one of the most unsolved aspects of this entire thing. We do have that bombshell that I briefly mentioned a moment ago about the sex worker. And the Evil Genius documentary Confession, right? Her name was Jessica Hoopstick. And this was a recently new development that kind of introduced a new like major twist. Jessica Hoopstick, she was Brian's friend, but she was also a sex worker, confessed on camera to setting him up for the collar bomb bank robbery in exchange for money and drugs from the conspirators. She claimed that one of those conspirators approached her to find a gopher, as they put it, who could be scared into robbing a bank, and she suggested Brian, and she even provided them with his work schedule. Jessica Hoopstick expressed in this documentary extremely deep remorse. She stated, quote, "It hurts me that I could do this to someone who I cared about," unquote, and insisted Wells was innocent, having, quote, no parts in the planning. He had no idea what was going to happen to him, which just makes that incredibly sad. This confession, which was nearly 15 years after this incredibly deadly heist even occurred, was a bombshell. Investigators, including retired ATF Special Agent Jason Wick and lead FBI investigator Jerry Clark, had long suspected Jessica Hoopstick's involvement, but she had been uncooperative at the time of the investigation. Wick and Clark believed that her statements in the documentary implicated herself as a conspirator, and that all of this new information should be passed to law enforcement for review because there is no statute of limitations for murder. In this documentary, she's essentially admitting to Brian not knowing what was going to happen to him and that she played a part in setting him up. She sat in the documentary and said, like, oh, I feel so bad about this, but like, girl, this man was killed, and he was killed largely based on the part that you played in coercing him or luring him to his death. Investigators also actually do, at the same time, express some skepticism about Jessica's full credibility. They do note that, quote, there is some evidence that directly conflicts with what she's saying, unquote. And they question her underlying motives for finally cooperating all of a sudden. Like, at the time of this documentary, Her timeline of events also conflicted with other witness testimonies. So despite this like dramatic confession on screen with Netflix, agencies have reportedly expressed no interest in pursuing new charges against Jessica or against any others that may have been involved in this conspiracy. And again, this is again one of the conflicting narratives and the lack of new legal action that contributes to the public's very lingering feeling amongst themselves that a lot of this crime remains unsolved and that there is a lot more to this story, if you can believe it, because there's already so much. There you have it, guys. The Brian Wells pizza bomber case stands as an unparalleled example of criminal complexity, horror, and sheer bizarreness, in my opinion. It was a very meticulously planned bank robbery involving a homemade collar bomb, a cruel scavenger hunt that was impossible to complete, and a very, very broad cast of individuals. The crime was not actually even about the money. It was intertwined with multiple murders, including the silencing of a witness, and driven by a twisted motive of patricide for inheritance. The human tragedy of Brian Wells, this man who was just caught up in this elaborate web of greed, deception, it can resonate. It does resonate very deeply. The bizarre characters who orchestrated this whole thing, right? We have the alleged serial killer mastermind. We have the drug dealer confessor. We have the fractured intellectual bomb maker. We have the uncalled witness, right? The rapist crack cocaine dealer. All of these insanely, it's just crazy. And all of this created a narrative that continues to defy easy categorization. The constant shifting of perceived truths from Wells as being an innocent victim to a limited co-conspirator to a fully participating co-conspirator. And then we have all these contradictory confessions. All of this ensures that this case will remain a subject of intense debate and fascination. It still fascinates me even now, going back over it. I'm just like, oh my gosh. I just want to like watch the Netflix documentary all over again and just like immerse myself in this case all over again. And it has left a lasting impact, I know, on me at least. It has influenced true crime documentaries. It has prompted reevaluations of police protocols for unprecedented threats. It's a very unique blend, right, of cruelty, psychological manipulation, sheer audacity of this entire thing kind of ensures its place as one of the most bizarre crimes ever committed in Western Pennsylvania, but probably also just in general. But ultimately, Brian Wells' case is a very chilling reminder of the dark complexities of the human psyche and the enduring power of a story that, despite convictions, still leaves so many questions lingering in the shadows. And that is, I really only barely skimmed the surface. Guys, I'm serious. Go watch the Netflix documentary, Evil Genius, if you're interested. Like, I mean, I'm just skimming here, right? But this case is crazy. It's crazy. It's bizarre. It's unreal. So, I mean, thank you guys for hanging out with me to talk about it. Again, I know it's old and I know like it's nothing like, you know, nothing to follow now, obviously, but it's definitely one of the most interesting cases still that I know. I like to just kind of revisit it every now and then. So I'm glad that you guys were here with me to do that. Tuesday. Today is Saturday. Tuesday, Houston Danker's trial begins in Iowa. I followed Karina Cooper. Karina Cooper was found guilty. She is the co-defendant with Houston Danker in the murder of Ryan Cooper, Karina's husband. She was found guilty. I'm going to do kind of like a pre-trial, refresher on Monday, focusing a little more on Houston than I did last time. Last time I focused on Karina, and then we're gonna watch this trial together, guys. I hope you'll join me for that. In the meantime, I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your weekend. Please, please, please stay safe. Keep asking all of those questions and keep unraveling. Love you.